They don't normally come out. You want a little pepper on yours? Even hot walking on the table.
Hi, Patricia. How are you?
Just a second. Hello.
How are you?
Good. Am I in the right session?
I'm sorry.
Am I in the right session? 1B1 and 1B2?
Yes. Are you the chair?
Yes, I am.
All right. Well, I'm Danny. I'm your host. I just think I'm in charge of, from my understanding, for doing it identical to last year, is I just pretty much keep this up and going.
Right.
You just let me, you're going to let them know the time.
Right.
And then
Right.
I have to hand over host controls to who's ever presenting so that they can present.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, so this goes from 12:30 to 1:20, correct? 9:30 to 10:20, I mean. Yeah.
Session 1 is 9:30 to 10:20 and session 2 is 10:30 to 11:20. And then we have like an hour break.
Well, I'm doing 1B1 and 1B2.
Oh, okay. Then yes, you're just from 9:30 to 10:20.
Yeah. So I went to the thing Steve had the other day about chairs. And so each person is going to get about 20 minutes.
Yes.
It's going to take me 2-3 minutes in the beginning to introduce myself, to tell them about timekeepers, things like that.
Okay.
So, okay, very good.
It's fine with the little splash of orange juice because the orange juice kind of takes away the sweetness.
Danny, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Danny, how many people are attending the conference? Do you know?
Over 200 this year.
Oh, good. Good.
So it's grown since we're virtual a lot more. They're able to open it up way more. Usually it was capped, I think, around 150 when it was in person. So I wonder how that's going to look when we go back.
Right. Right.
If we ever go back to doing live conferences, which I hope we do. I think I need that more than anything in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I hope we do. Although this is the first time I've been able to go to this one in Las Vegas in the summer.
I kind of wish they're going to almost make it hybrid. So those who can't attend, there is a way to do it virtually so that they can.
Yeah.
Because I would love it if they could continue to do NCTE and Allen virtually, because there's just times it's a big stretch.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't want to have to try to figure that out, because if I were a presenter, I don't think I'd want to do live and Zoom, you know.
Well, if you have a camera set up where it's like you're presenting and you're there, it might be able to do it that way. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think this has changed the conversation of how we need to do things to a degree.
Right. Yeah.
So,
So I hope it goes back face to face, but I also, what's nice about online is that more people can go. It's cheaper, it's
Oh, one.
greener, it's everything, you know.
it's 100%.
Yeah, it's not saying it's better, but it's different.
The chair right there broke. She sat in it really hard.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. I'm Patricia Dunn. I'm the chair. I'll be starting in a couple of minutes.
And our friend in the back, why can't I remember your name? This just came up.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
Good, good. Oh my gosh, how are you?
Where's the captain suit? I'm looking forward to seeing the captain suit. Are we going to wear it this time? Or your pilot? It's your pilot suit, right?
Well, you know, I've got several suits that I wear, and a song that goes with each one. Like the captain suit goes with oh shoot, way across the ocean, far beyond the seven seas. There's a, you know, that's that old song.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course there's the Captain Picard suit, and there's the cowboy suit, and oh my gosh, I think I have 11 that I have for class and cosplaying, and also for connecting with people who are I think need a laugh.
I look forward to them. Oh, by the way, how is your granddaughter as well?
Great, and I have a new one. We have a new one coming.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. We have, that'll make, well, we don't know if it's a granddaughter or a grandson, but we'll have, that will make 6.
Okay, well, thank you. Hi, everybody. It's 12:30. So I think I want to start on time so everybody has time to go and have a chat afterwards. I'm Patricia Dunn. I'm the chair. And I will be the timekeeper for this. The 2 speakers each get 20 minutes. We're trying to save 5 to 10 minutes at the end for questions. And I will voice the chat presentation related questions at the end. I'm asked to remind you to mute your microphones and to cut down on email and other apps just for bandwidth purposes. I can give the speakers a 2-minute warning in the chat. And then at 20 minutes, I will, as politely as I can, if you're still talking, I will try to ask you to wrap it up so that the other people will have time to talk. Any tech questions could go to the host, Danny. And let's see, so we have 2 speakers today. Mandy Luscheck, am I saying that right, Mandy? And Tom Smith from Utah Valley University. They're talking on creating a more caring world, identifying and developing empathy with young adult literature. And I'm sorry? And the second speaker is Darby Simpson, Arizona State University. Her talk is, Sick Lit, Considerations and Representations of Chronic Illness in Young Adult Literature. So with that,
I think you started muting yourself, Patricia, a little early.
Sorry. What did you hear? Sorry about that. I don't know how I did that.
With that, and then nothing.
Oh, okay. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mandy and Tom. Are you ready, Mandy and Tom?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Mandy, I'm gonna give you the host, transfer host to you so that you can present and control for the 20 minutes. And then when you're done, can you please give me back host control so then I can pass it to the next person?
As long as I know how to pass it back, I'm sure I'll figure it out.
If you go to the side where like you'll see everyone, you'll click and see more. Like if you highlight their name, go to more. If you have like their participants on the side and click more, you can hit make host or make co-host. Oh, I can actually make you a co-host. That should work.
Make you co-host?
Cool. And I think hosts can mute people too, right? In case they haven't muted themselves for some reason. And people are, okay. Well, I'll go ahead and start. So my name is Mandy Luscheck. I am an assistant professor at Utah Valley University. And this was my first year, though it didn't really feel like a real first year since it was COVID and it was remote. I think I went on campus into my office like 3 times. But my colleague, Tom Smith, he is actually on an airplane right now. So he has pre-recorded his part of the presentation. So I'm going to start with that. And I hope that you are able to see it well. I know sometimes sharing videos can be a little glitchy, but I'm hoping that it will work. All right. Okay, you should see my screen. And I'm going to start with Tom.
Hi, all. My name is Tom Smith. I'm a professor at Utah Valley University, and I'm presenting today with my friend and colleague, Mandy Luscheck. We're talking about using empathy with YA literature. I apologize for having to record this. Travel snafu led to me being unable to attend today in person. I'm traveling across the country right now. And so Mandy will do all the heavy lifting. But I'm going to start by laying out a foundation for what we're doing here with using empathy as a goal and what we mean by that. And then Mandy will share some examples of work and some other things with you. First of all, empathy. Why empathy? Well, research shows that as a people, we are becoming less and less empathetic, especially towards those who disagree with us. We're drawing deeper and deeper lines and to divide ourselves from one another. Empathy leads to mutual respect, leads towards efforts towards justice-oriented actions. We don't have to agree on what exactly those actions are, but with the definition of empathy we're using, empathy leads towards those types of actions. We're using Nicole Mira's work on empathy for this. And she says that empathy is the ability to move beyond oneself and into the perspective of another. So not just kind of seeing things from someone else's vantage point, but actually kind of being able to inhabit that and understand how it feels to be in that position, the strengths and weaknesses, the fears, to understand those things and to respect those. So Mira shares a matrix when she's talking about empathy and what she means by empathy, and it's useful to keep this in mind. It's oriented along 2 axes. The horizontal axis moves from not viewing each other as human, in essence, to, on the other end, viewing everyone as human, mutual humanization. Okay? That's kind of commonly what we think of as empathy. But Mira's work adds another axis, this vertical axis. On the bottom, we have not oriented towards action. But on the top, this is oriented toward action. Empathy, in other words, true empathy, or what she calls critical civic empathy, not only allows us to see everyone around us as human, but also then to work to create a just world for everyone. Okay. The other quadrants, if you have false empathy, right? So this is political action, but not motivated by mutual humanization. This is, you can see this when people will speak with great empathy about a group of people, but without empathy about other groups of people. That's false empathy. Okay. On the other side, we have mutual humanization, but no action. That's just this individual empathy. This is like, oh yeah, you have it tough, period, done. And we need more than that. As our goal in education, we need more than just, it's tough for you. That's maybe a place to begin, but it has to go beyond that. And then if you don't have mutual humanization and you don't have any action, then it's just kind of imaginative refusal of any sort of societal impetus for anything. Okay. So with that in mind, why literature and empathy? I think there are some reasons that young adult literature is a really strong vehicle for us to teach critical empathy. First of all, the emphasis in YA literature on multiple perspectives, right? It's not uncommon. In fact, it's fairly common in young adult literature where every chapter is actually by a different narrator. And we don't have to like all the narrators. But it's by varying the perspectives, we start to see that a single event has multiple ways of being viewed and multiple ways of being understood, right? One character may see themselves as just offering helpful, constructive criticism to someone else. That person, though, may view it as an attack for a certain reason. And we, by seeing both perspectives, can understand both perspectives, and we can start to see that. The second area is that much of young adult literature has as its aim, its central conflict seems to be, can the protagonist come to know themselves? And can they become comfortable with themselves? And part of that is them realizing in many ways that what they think of as weaknesses may not be weaknesses. They're weaknesses because society's defined them that way. And so when teens can inhabit that perspective and when they can see that, it helps them then to apply that idea to themselves. They can then begin to see that their goofy parts, the parts they are a little bit embarrassed about, maybe that embarrassment comes because of social construction, right? Or maybe the fact that we are picking on this other person in our school, that's also social construction. They're wearing the wrong clothes. They aren't really wearing the wrong clothes. They're just wearing clothes. We've defined them as wrong, right? They can start to see those sorts of things and deeper issues as well, obviously. The last idea, this is one of the things I love about YA literature, is it really reinforces the idea of agency in teens. A single teen in a single novel probably is not changing the world. They're not all Katniss Everdeen. Most of them are not, right? But many of them affect change in their smaller worlds. And they have power there, and they take that power. And then it gives our students a way to see how they might take action. So if we're going to do this, if we're going to use YA literature for these reasons, and we're going to move forward, I would like to propose three basics that I think will help all teachers do this, because I understand that even this work, when we say empathy, and we may not be saying social justice, we may not be uttering the word race, but this can still be treacherous ground for teachers. Three basics: focus on individuals. Now, individuals have identities, and we can talk about all of those identities, right? This character is a male. Well, that brings with it certain strengths, certain limit, or certain social power, certain social disempowerment, maybe less as a male, but maybe as a person of color, there's more, right? So in other words, we can focus on individuals. And we talk about that. We connect it to our students' lives. when have you felt the way this character does? Have you ever experienced something like this? Now, it may not be for the same reason, but have you ever experienced like this? And then one thing I would suggest is look for deeper patterns. If these powers, if these things are socially constructed, how is that power, how is that social perception maintained? How's it built? How's it maintained? Why do even people who are disempowered by something buy into it? What are the tools that are being used there? And even if they aren't necessarily used consciously, like what are the factors that cause that? When we can do those three things, that's really close reading. That's really literary analysis. The fact that we're asking questions that lead to empathy, when we have empathy as our goal, we are doing these things that are strictly, rigorously within the domain of English, but they're serving our broader purpose of teaching our students to be more critically empathetic. Thank you for your time. I will turn this over to Mandy now.
Okay. Here we go. Okay, so Tom kind of gave us a background of what we're talking about in terms of looking at young adult literature through a lens of empathy. And I wanted to give some more kind of practical application of this practice. And so I think my slide starts here. Okay. So a couple of things that I wanted to point out, quotes that I came across when I was looking into this that I thought were kind of significant, were just these two different concepts. One, the idea that young adult literature has the ability to shape students with intellectual curiosity, a caring heart, and a belief in the common good. And that with a focus on recognizing, identifying, and discussing empathy seen in YA works, educators can navigate students toward the heart of social responsibility caring. So it's kind of like this, Rudine Sims Bishop concept of the windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. Through literature, we have the opportunity to not only see ourselves, a reflection of our own experiences, but we can look through these windows or even step through these doors into someone else's life, into their culture, into their world, into their experiences, and have an understanding of things that we wouldn't normally within our own sphere of our lives. And so how can we accomplish this in our classrooms? So one thing that I propose that has been successful for me is using the multi-genre book project in my classroom and having students look for these opportunities to relate to characters and experiences that are beyond their own experiences to kind of develop that empathy. And so first of all, what's really nice about the multi-genre book project is it can be used in any classroom with almost any book, any grade level. And so this allows a really large selection or opportunity for different text selection. I put a couple of different books on the screen that I have read, that I have used in my young adult literature classes, or that I used in my 7th grade classroom when I was teaching 7th grade or high school, that allow students to see something different than themselves. So Ghost Boys and Dear Martin, these are both BLM books. Stuck in Neutral and Out of My Mind, these are both neurodiverse books. You look into characters who, actually both of those books are based on main characters who have cerebral palsy. And then Whirligig is a story that uses that multi-voice perspective that Tom was talking about, where we can see different characters in different stories and follow along. But primarily it's a story of struggling with identity and acceptance, and then redemption. So these are just some examples of books that work really well for a multi-genre book project. But I also think it's really nice. You can have all of your students read the same class book, or they can all be reading independent novels. And this is a project that you can provide them to do at the completion of that reading. And so with the multi-genre book project, you allow students the opportunity to explore the book that they have read through different modes that they choose. So just some examples that allow for this idea of choice, interest, creation, and connection are creating a podcast on themes or concepts within the book, creating journal entries from different character perspectives within the book, primarily journal entries from a character who was a secondary character, so not the main character in the book, creating a newspaper, a video documentary, a social media portfolio, a scrapbook. All of these are different examples of different formats that students can complete projects in. So I just wanted to share, well, before that, I thought this was a really nice quote. It says, "Our brains cannot often distinguish between what are real experiences and what are fictional. Thus, art is a great exercise at experiencing empathy." So essentially, that reading of literature allows our students to to feel these different emotions and different experiences through art. But also in the multi-genre book project, they are creating art as well, which helps them to be even more connected with these concepts. So I have an example. I have a student who created a multi-genre project on Ghost Boys, and he kind of created this, not even really sure what to call it, because he kind of went off this documentary idea, but he created a video based essentially on like the Black Lives Matter movement, and he incorporated his own poem that he read, and he incorporated quotes from the book, and it was just really well done. But I wanted to kind of end with, I can share this PowerPoint, and this link will actually take you to the presentation he created. But I wanted to share his reflection on doing the project. And this was in a English methods course. And so he is studying to be an English teacher, but he was completing this as if he was a student, a high school student.
One of the greatest things I learned from this project was the ability to empathize, and even just for a second to put myself in the shoes of a Black American, what it might be like to fear, what it might be like to have this kind of experience. And for me, it just added to the importance of talking about it, the importance of making it known, showing the video, showing the faces of those who have died due to racism and police brutality. It's not an easy topic, but it needs to be talked about. And that's something that I learned from this project as well, is the hard topics are things that need to be discussed. I mean, even if it's in a classroom, right? I want to teach high school English. And the reality is that these hard topics have to be talked about. We have to let the younger generations know about what is going on, what happened, why it happened, and not sugarcoat it, and not gloss over it, not just send out worksheets or homework assignments, but make it an experience for them. And that's kind of what I hope to recreate with this video.
So I just want to say I did share that with his permission. He knew I was going to share that little reflection clip. But overall, that's what we have for you. And I hope that you can take away some ideas of how you can approach literature in your classrooms with a focus on students being able to kind of foster empathy for worlds outside their own. And I will pass it over to Darby.
Thank you. And Danny, if you're able to make me a co-host as well, so I can share also. And my name is Darby Simpson. I am a doctoral student in English education at Arizona State University. And I will be talking with you all today about an area of study that is newer to me. So I'm also really interested in feedback from all of you as well and thoughts that you have. So definitely when we have time for questions later, I'm interested in whatever you have to share with me also. So I will be talking a little bit about chronic illness and how that is represented in young adult literature. Can you all see the screen okay? Just want to make sure I shared the correct, I have multiple monitors and just want to make sure I shared the correct one. Some opening questions that I was curious from all of you. And if you want to use the reaction feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, I'm curious how many of you know at least one person who has a chronic disease, whether that might be yourself, whether that might be a friend, family member, anyone that you know at all. We've got several people raising their hands and some that are just, I think, figuring out the reaction buttons as well. And then you can raise your hand again or note at all. I'm curious also how many of you have taught a student before or multiple students who you were aware had any kind of chronic disease. I know sometimes it's something we're not always aware of as well. So this would just be that you are aware of. And since there are quite a number of you that have known individuals with chronic illness, have taught students that have chronic illness, I'm also curious to know then, leading to this discussion, what are any, and you can just put this in the chat, what are any young adult books that maybe you have read that feature characters with chronic illness? And you're also welcome to lower your hand from the raise hand feature if you would like. But yes, many people mentioning The Fault in Our Stars, and got a few others as well. I think The Fault in Our Stars is one I'm going to talk a little bit about since it is one I expected that many of you would be familiar with. But you may notice that the list is not large of different novels that we probably could brainstorm as a list altogether of novels that feature characters that have chronic illness. There are some, they definitely exist, and I appreciate seeing a few that I actually haven't heard of myself or have not read, so I may add these to my list as well. So I appreciate you adding in some of those thoughts. I wanted to also then share, in talking about chronic disease, that the CDC defines chronic disease as conditions that last 1 year or more and require ongoing medical attention or limit activities of daily living, or both. So I found, in looking for definitions in many different places, and I also found that it's somewhat complicated to ask the question and kind of think about how chronic illness and disability intersect and how they can be the same, but they can that they also can be different. So I think that's interesting that as I looked at different definitions, I found that often disability is focusing on the limitations of activities part of that definition, but it may not necessarily be something that requires ongoing medical attention is kind of the difference, I think, in what I had noticed. So there are times that you will see chronic illness classified as a disability, but there are also times that you'll see it not classified as a disability. So I think it's worth thinking about how those overlap or differ from each other a little bit as well. Chronic diseases are the leading causes of death and disability in the US. I listed some of the main examples that are discussed on the CDC website, since I was using that as the source for this information on this slide. So there obviously are many others besides those that you see listed there, but those are some of the chronic illnesses that you may find represented in some of the texts that you all mentioned as well. I'll look at a little more data that came from the CDC website. 6 in 10 adults in the US have a chronic disease. 4 in 10 adults have 2 or more, and 1 in 4 children in the US has a chronic disease. It's interesting to think about then, and with even those of you that raised your hand earlier, just how many of us are touched by the lives of people that have chronic illness. Whether some of us may experience that ourselves now or at some point in the future in our lives, or whether we have family members, friends, others that we know, it seems that most everyone comes into contact with chronic disease at some time. And so it's definitely stands to reason that most of the students that we work with, that will also be true for. Whether they're students who themselves have a chronic disease, or whether it's students who may have a family member who has a chronic disease, or a friend, but they're most likely going to have contact with someone, since it is something that impacts such a large number of people, and even that 4 in 10 adults have 2 or more chronic diseases. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that it is a large population of individuals that are impacted. But why think about the representation of chronic illness in young adult literature? Disability and mental illness have really, I feel like, started to gain more attention in recent years. I was actually also, I have to note, super excited because when I saw that Patricia Dunn was chairing our session, because I don't think we actually have met before, but I know that she has done a lot of work with disability in young adult literature. So thanks for the thumbs up, Patricia. Would love to chat sometime. But also, there are other scholars as well that have focused on disability and mental illness in young adult literature. And again, chronic illness can overlap in some ways with both of those, as some individuals with chronic illness, again, can be classified as having a disability. It's also not uncommon for individuals that have a chronic illness to also suffer from some mental illness as well, as a result of everything that they're going through with their chronic illness. So while those two areas have gained a lot of attention, chronic illness is an area that in the research that I've done so far seems to be less well represented in young adult literature. And also it's just interesting to look at how illness is represented in literature as well. And another reason that this was a topic that is of interest to me personally, I also have known many individuals that have experienced chronic illness. I had a close friend when I was growing up that had a chronic illness. I also now have a daughter who just turned 4 who has a chronic illness, and I would say that was probably the biggest kind of game changer in my life, and definitely changed kind of what things that I paid attention to related to chronic illness, and I would say that any time that I've come into contact with texts, such as some of those that you all have mentioned earlier that I'll talk a little bit about in a moment, I just can't help but think about my daughter and what her life will be like as she gets older and what texts will be available to her. I'm really excited also that Mandy was able to share the information in her section of the presentation. I think it fits really well together to think about empathy and how that plays a role with chronic illness represented in young adult literature. And my main goal was to just talk a little bit about chronic illness and also share a little bit about a few different novels. I intentionally chose a couple that you probably might be a little more familiar with. So I think probably The Fault in Our Stars is the one that has had the most notoriety, and probably a lot of you are at least somewhat familiar with that story if you have not read it. And then also 5 Feet Apart by Rachel Lippincott features characters with cystic fibrosis. That one also is of interest to me because that is the disease that my daughter has as well. So that one especially captured my attention when it first came out. And then I also chose another one that was just one that I had read recently that really captured my interest, which was The Memory Book by Laura Avery. And I'll talk about that a little bit as well. And I know I don't have lots of time left, but want to share a little bit about those stories, and also thinking about what kinds of kind of criteria or questions might you ask in looking at these texts, either yourself to determine how you might use them with students, or even thinking about how you might discuss these texts with students. And even though chronic illness, I think, fits into a slightly different category than disability, I still found that a lot of the research that's been done using a disability lens still in a lot of ways fits or can be adapted to fit these texts as well. So I came across, and this is just one snapshot of some of the things I've been looking at, knowing that I'd be a little bit short on time as well, but just wanting to think about some questions to get you started that would be thinking about the characters in each text, first of all, and how do they challenge what might be considered a normalcy narrative, or, you know, what is a character that is considered normal, and how are these characters with chronic illness then considered to be other than normal in this case. So I'm going to kind of flip back and forth a little bit with the two slides here. So I wanted to keep my slides fairly short, but want to kind of show the questions, but also go back to thinking about the stories. So in The Fault in Our Stars, which again is probably the one that you may be more familiar with the story, definitely the characters of Hazel and Augustus are both characters who have cancer, or are in Augustus's case is in remission from cancer, and the things that they're experiencing because of having gone through having cancer make them definitely not your normal average teenager of what we might think of as a normal teenager. And I would also say that it's important to think about whether or not the chronic illness that these characters have also acts as a catalyst for the story. And in this case, it definitely does, that Hazel and Augustus meet at a support group. And if they didn't have cancer ever and did not attend that support group, they never would have met. And the story would not have happened. And they would not go off on an adventure that they refer to as a cancer perk. Many times of things that they are able to experience because of having the disease or diseases that they have. I would also say that it's worth thinking about how those chronic illnesses shape their identities as well. And also especially thinking about what other identities do any of the characters have in these novels that intersect with the fact that they have a disease as well. And I think that's something that's interesting to note because as is the case in this story, other than gender, there often aren't a lot of other intersecting identities that are portrayed in the novels that I have read so far, which I'm making my way through several others as well. So in The Fault in Our Stars, like I said, other than gender, there's not a lot of other differing identities that are portrayed. And also, again, because Hazel, for example, as really the protagonist of the story, has had cancer for several years, she really doesn't really talk much about her life before the time that she had cancer. So it really has made up a lot of her identity of who she is in that story, is the fact that she has cancer. You know, she also mentions that she doesn't attend regular school. She has already finished her high school coursework and is now a college student in college courses, but she does not attend regular school classes because of her illness. So again, a lot of her identity is very much wrapped up in the fact that she has cancer. And then again, because cancer is something that is also terminal, it's something that means that death is an ever-present force in the story as well throughout the novel. And I would say many of those things are also true for the other stories. So in 5 Feet Apart, this one you may also be familiar with since there was a film version. I will note that I actually haven't seen the film, so I hope if it's different than things that I talk about and you have seen the film, it would be because I have not seen the film, only read the book. So, but in this story, Stella and a couple of other characters, Poe and Will, all have cystic fibrosis, and they meet in a hospital where they are all patients, and they're all having a more extended stay in the hospital because of treatments that they're undergoing for cystic fibrosis at that time. And again, because they all have cystic fibrosis, they definitely would not be considered more of a normal character. And there are other characters that come into the novel at times that are friends of theirs from, you know, the outside world from the hospital. But I would say that as a whole, they are definitely challenging the normalcy narrative. They are also showcasing chronic illness as a catalyst for the narrative, since they would not be in the hospital if they did not have cystic fibrosis. And since it is a lifelong illness, it definitely similarly shapes their identities. There is the character of Poe in this one, who is gay. So there are a little bit of overlapping identities, but he is a supporting character and not one of the primary characters in the text. And again, it is a fairly serious disease, so death is an ever-present force throughout this story as well. And then I did want to just briefly talk about the memory book. I know I'm about out of time, but with the memory book, that is a little bit different in that the main character, Sammy, is experiencing an illness that means she is going to lose her memory very quickly, and also that her body will shut down. The one difference with this novel is it's fairly new for her to start experiencing symptoms. So she does start out as more of a normal teenager, and she's very unwilling to accept that her life is going to change, and then it very quickly does. And it's interesting to see how she handles that shift in her life and everything she planned to do, including going to college, that she is not able to do in the way that she expected. So it very much fits similar criteria that the other novels did, but with some slight variation. And this is one that, if you have not read, that I definitely recommend to see the experience of family and friends and how they experience being close to someone that has a chronic illness. I also just shared here on the last slide, and I'll share the presentation slides with you all. But if you are interested in more information about chronic disease, and also there's information on the CDC website specifically about schools and how schools can assist students with chronic illness. And I think that might be something that you would find helpful. And then I also have a Google Doc that's a book list that I have started, which I will now add lots more titles to from all of you. But you'll have a copy of this that you can refer back to at a later time as well. And I will pass it back over to Patricia.
Well, thank you very much, Darby. And thank you very much, Mandy, and also Tom from a distance. So we have about 7 minutes left. There are a lot of good suggestions in the chat. And if people have questions, if you put them in the chat, we don't have time for a lot, but I'll, I can read them from the chat and direct them to whomever. Let's see, we've got 3 new messages here. Well, lots of thanks and great resources. As I said, there's a lot of good suggestions in the chat. If people have questions, please put them in the chat and I will, relate them and call on people. And there's also links to the to the presentations in there in the chat. So I'll voice some of the suggestions. See, let's see. Oh, there's a lot here. Drums, girls, dangerous pie. Let's see. Someone talked about how the book could trigger students who had experiences with cancer. Everything, Everything, Full Disclosure, Wonder, Sugar Stars, lycanthropy and other chronic illnesses, mental health illnesses in Hopkins YA novels. As I said, the presentations are there. Novels from Lorene McDaniel. Here's some more insignificant events in the life of a cactus by Dusty Bowling. Is about a girl who was born with no arms. Good companion topic is edited by Dr. Bickmore and Michelle Falter. Says thank you for promoting that, Steve, in my book. Stars and Blackness Between Them, and everybody's saying great resources, so many good books, and compliments. So, what questions do people have? Would the presenters have any more comments for us or questions for us? We still have about 5 minutes.
I was just noting that I remember reading Lorene McDaniel as far back as being an elementary school student myself even. So I know there are texts that have been out there for quite some time, but they are still few in number.
Thank you. I'm interested in the question that Claudia said about the discussion that you had with your students about triggering other students. Claudia, do you want to say anything about that? Like what that conversation was like, or if teachers should do any prep work before they assign these or talk about them in class?
Hi, I've unmuted myself. I guess what it stood out to me is we've got to know our students. And sometimes we don't know about those diseases. And especially we don't know if maybe it's not them who's been touched specifically by the disease, but maybe someone in their family.
Mhm.
And I just learned to be a whole lot more gentle and tentative at the beginning, starting the conversation. And I tried to leave lots of space so students could tell me, maybe me first personally and privately,
Mhm.
because I didn't want to make them sit there through the whole book thinking that, here they are immersed in this story when they go home and they live it too. So I tried to be more sensitive and just give kids that space to talk to me about things going on in their lives.
Great, thank you very much. And there's a question here for me, actually. Thoughts on the development and progress of disability representation in YA in the field of English Ed. Well, I do think authors are getting better with representations of disability in YA Lit. And I think the field is becoming more aware of it. I'm still wary of a lot of the, canonical texts that are taught in the schools. And I really don't know how much those are being critiqued from a disability studies point of view. I'm thinking of The Glass Menagerie, of Mice and Men, some of the Shakespeare plays, which I love, by the way, myths that are taught, fairy tales. There are just so many classical texts out there that have really, I think, harmful representations of disability and probably chronic illness too. And, unless people are raising questions about those, I'm not saying we shouldn't read them, but I think that we need to ask different questions about those representations and challenge some of them. And I think we have 1 more minute. So somebody else said,
I was just going to note too that there are also multiple other presentations coming up in the next couple days here on disability. So I am excited to see some of those. So for others of you that may not have seen that yet, there are other presentations coming up on that topic.
Great, thank you, Darby. Thank you, Diane. Let's see, and Morgan asks, I think this will probably have to be the last question. How do you keep from reinforcing identity trauma while also addressing these topics? And either presenter want to take that?
I was just going to say that I think this ties into a little bit what I talked about with text selection is in my classroom, it's really important that students have student choice. So I never want to censor what students are reading or deny them opportunities to read things, but I want to give them the opportunity to pick things that they might not be a trigger for them, so they're not forced to read something that is going to be harmful to them, but it's not keeping another student from reading it if it allows them to develop that empathy and insight into a different understanding.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I would have said the exact same thing.
Well, I have 119, no, 120. So we are officially out of time. Thank you so much for an enlightening presentation, everybody. And I hope to see some of you later in this conference. Thank you. Bye-bye.